Asia has been leading the way out of the financial crisis with tremendous economic growth. But is this new money being spread evenly? Are the poor benefiting at the same rate as the rich? That's our topic for this world debate from Jakarta. Is Asia sharing the wealth? Welcome to the World Economic Forum in Jakarta and our world debate. We're here as part of our BBC season, The Power of Asia. Across BBC television, radio and online, we're looking at the rise of this part of the world and what it means for our economies. Asia's wealth is certainly the envy of countries elsewhere in the globe. But today we ask what the record is in Asia sharing the wealth. What is the evidence that wealth is being shared, and how much interest is there even in narrowing the gap between rich and poor? With me here in Jakarta is an audience of delegates to the World Economic Forum. Welcome to you all. And also a panel who between them represent 4 Asian countries and different perspectives from government, the corporate world and also civil society. Let me begin by introducing them to you. Apisit Chachiwa has been Thailand's Prime Minister since the end of 2008, weathering a prolonged movement against his government by the so-called red shirt protesters. His country is experiencing strong economic growth at present, but he faces a crucial test in the next few weeks with the forthcoming election. Mari Pangestu is Indonesia's Minister of Trade, an economist by profession. She became the first Chinese-Indonesian woman ever to serve as a cabinet minister. She's also played a leading role in the UN Millennium Project's task force on poverty and development. Walden Bello is a congressman in the Philippines and has been known as a political activist for 40 years. He's particularly well known for his critical views on the downside of Asia's economic boom and the role of the World Bank and the IMF in this part of the world. And Prashant Ruia is the CEO of Essar Group, which is one of India's most striking business successes. It was built up by his father and uncle. Today it's a huge conglomerate with interests in oil, gas, steel, shipping and construction, and he himself has been in the family business since 1985. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your panel. I'd like to begin the discussion by looking at some of the evidence of inequalities. Here is data recently compiled by Forbes magazine. In 2010, 40 Indonesians held combined wealth equivalent to over 10% of GDP. In Thailand, the 40 wealthiest citizens are worth an amount equivalent to nearly 12% of Thailand's GDP. I'd like to ask you all how you feel hearing a striking statistic like that. Prime Minister.
Well, I think the important thing to notice is that despite the fact that we've made efforts to lift people out of poverty, we've discovered that economic growth is the most powerful tool of doing that. But that growth has been dependent on the market system. And whatever the failings of the market system, at least it can be expected to deliver growth, deliver efficiency, but it's never expected to deliver equality. Which is why I think it's important for not just the government now in these days, but the private sector to seriously think about growth models which will allow us to continue to enjoy strong growth while at the same time being able to share the wealth.
But do you feel disillusioned thinking about the fact that 40 Thai citizens...
I see it as a very important challenge, and I see that unless we with the problem, the growth would not be able to be sustained. I think it would put greater tension within the economy, within the political system, and therefore it is very important that we address the issue. For Thailand and for the Thai government, my own government, when we were faced with the impact of the global financial crisis, we were very conscious that the way we engineer the recovery would be to make sure that the most vulnerable, the least fortunate, are looked after first.
Minister Mari Pangestu of Indonesia, this country isn't sharing the wealth at the moment, is it?
Well, I think we have achieved growth and we have achieved poverty reduction, absolute poverty reduction. But we also recognize that inequities are there. That's why moving forward, our target is to have growth with equity, more inclusive growth. You know, when you mentioned was really income inequity, but you have inequities on different levels also between women and men. I mean, on average, women are 77% of the wage of men. You have the differences in wages and conditions between formal sector and informal sector, between unskilled workers and skilled workers. So as the Prime Minister said, how can governments moving forward together with the business sector come up with policies, better targeted policies to make the society more inclusive in the benefits of growth? And you have, Indonesia is a country which is very geographically wide and very disparate. So you have the issue of including the most remote area of Papua and Java, where a lot of the poor are, with Sulawesi, Kalimantan, where the resource booms are. So I think these are the challenges ahead of us.
Congressman Bello, you're a politician now, but you've been a political activist for many years. The people in government are saying all the wrongs, but how do you feel about hearing them?
Usually people in government see the glass as half full, and I have always tended, even now that I'm in government, to see it as half empty. And there are very real reasons for this. I think that certainly the growth economies of Southeast Asia have experienced high growth rates, but they have also experienced rising inequality. So, and this is an experience that China has also experienced. China's rates of inequality are now, despite the fact that it has been one of the highest growing economies in the world, are the greatest, over the last 30 years. And then you have a low growth, high poverty economy like the Philippines, where the levels of inequality are very high. In fact, together with Cambodia, we have the highest Gini coefficient in Southeast Asia. So I guess what this really shows is that growth is not enough. You really have to have measures to address inequality, and especially with respect to the Philippines at this point, you really have to have a good population management program, which everybody else in Asia has except the Philippines.
Prashant Ruia, India is proof, isn't it, that the boom and business successes like yours, economic growth, aren't necessarily enough?
No, I think for a country of our size, to get the entire population above the poverty line and to get them into the middle income is a process which will take some amount of time. But I think over the last decade, we've seen GDP growth of between 7 and 9% on a steady basis. And that has actually doubled our middle income from 150 million people to 300 million people now. And as we see this growth continue, I think you will see the trickle-down effect and a larger number of our population coming into the middle income category, and the quality of life.
You really believe in the trickle-down effect then?
No, what I'm saying is that there has been a positive sign of a large percentage of our population moving into the middle income over the last decade. Obviously, a lot more needs to be done, but as I said, for a country of our size, it is something which is going to take a period of time.
Prime Minister, do you believe in trickle-down economics?
No, I don't. I do think trickle-down does happen, but it won't be quick enough. It won't be enough. And I think we have to be careful. We should resist the temptation of seeing growth and inequality as being opposed to each other. I insist that to beat poverty, it's easier to do so with a high growth environment than a low growth one. For us in Thailand, we have been looking at people-centered development. So issues like education, skills training, mobility, these are all very important issues to make sure that we do have truly inclusive growth, how to include people into the growth and development process. And in sectors, for instance, in the rural sector, agricultural sector, you have to create more incentives, more security to make sure that these people can share the wealth. One of the traps that Asia might fall into is that our wealth creation is reflected through savings, which reflects the fact that we produce far more than we consume. And we do that, which means we rely on export markets, and often we therefore rely on low wages. We're now trying to restructure that. My proposal now is that we need to move to a higher wage economy so that there is a stronger domestic economy. We no longer rely on actually pushing some people's incomes down to generate growth.
Minister, I just want to pursue this idea of the correlation between growth and inequality with you. Although I can see the Prime Minister's point is that you'd rather be tackling poverty reduction from a position of economic growth than not. But does high economic growth, such as what you've experienced in Indonesia, let governments off the hook or even distract them from these really important issues?
No, of course not. I mean, all governments, despite what Warren says, we are very focused on ensuring quality growth, not just growth. So broad-based inclusive growth is the target, I would say, of most governments. But how do you achieve that effectively? If you look at the experience of Indonesia, the wage gaps that the Prime Minister mentioned is actually created because of technological lack of connectivity technologically, as well as education. You know, the differences come because of that. So how do you address that equal opportunity for education and health? Because it's related to the quality of the human resources. So you have to focus on education, providing education and health and equal opportunity.
Everything that you're saying sounds very positive. I just want to put to you, though, some of the strong reaction that we got when we mentioned on Facebook earlier that we were going to be discussing this very topic. So, this was some of the reaction that came back. Asia is not sharing the wealth. If they do, they would go poor and not make gains. You must exploit others to live, and that's what makes the world go around. Someone else said Southeast Asia is just a series of family-run enterprises and families rule governments. Prashant Ruia, I have to look to you as a representative of a very powerful family business in India.
I don't agree with some of this. If you look at India, I mean, again, the largest number of entrepreneurs which a country has is coming out of India. And a lot of the development which is taking place now in the country is being driven by the private sector, driven by entrepreneurs, and they are the ones who are actually today playing a very major part in the development of the country. And that's what's providing the growth.
But they're often from big business families, aren't they?
No, I think if you look around India today, you will have a very, very large number of entrepreneurs who are self-employed, whether it's in the retail area, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in business. And yes, there are obviously a few large groups which have also taken large risk and have invested heavily in the development of the country. So. I mean, it's more for the government to decide what is the right answer. But I do believe that entrepreneurship is playing a very big role in the development of the countries.
Okay, well let me ask the Prime Minister and the Trade Minister. Is Southeast Asia just a series of family-run businesses?
No, I think we are moving away from that model. I think the issue of governance, the issue of transparency are now coming to the fore. And I believe that when you're in a high-growth environment, despite the fact that there may be an increase in inequality, that will actually put more political pressure, because I think as people move out of absolute poverty, they have high expectations about their lives. They want to have political rights, they want to see higher standards as far as governance is concerned. And therefore, I think these issues need to be addressed. And I don't believe that you could run on a model of exploitation forever. You will only increase more and more tension.
Well, let me just add that maybe that was true pre-97-98 financial crisis, even like Indonesia and Thailand. But after the financial crisis, basically, you've had a total transformation. The banks and the businesses are no longer related because of the much stricter regulations, and the whole a lot of the family businesses had to transform themselves after the crisis. And there's a much larger number who have gone public. And once you go public, you are under subject to transparency.
Congressman, has that much changed in Southeast
No,
Asia?
I would disagree with that. I think that whether it's Indonesia, Thailand, or the Philippines, you still really have a small number of families controlling the wealth. I think there have been slight changes, but I would say that qualitatively the situation has not changed. Part of the reason that inequality persists is lack of good governance, lack of democratization. And here, with all due respect to the Prime Minister of Thailand, I think Thailand has taken slid back in terms of democracy ever since the 2006 military coup. And Thailand cannot, at this point, tell the Burmese military junta, you better start behaving, when it has this same record of military intervention. So I guess I just want to bring in the fact that good governance is really critical and democratization is really key. Now, having said that, I would like to say that despite the fact that we've had 26 years of democracy in the Philippines, it has been such a limited democracy that it hasn't really been able to change the structures of inequality. So we all face the same problems at this point in time, but good governance and democracy, they're very important part of the mix.
I would need to respond to that.
Yeah, your democratic, your democratic
we
certainly
certainly took a step back with the coup in 2006, but you have to recognize that since the coup, we've had a referendum on the constitution. We are now having, the elections on the 3rd of July will be the second set of elections, and the parliamentary process is functioning. My government is bringing back the rule of law. My government is now pushing forward with a pro...
But your government benefited from that setback in democracy?
No, not really. There were elections...
By coming to power?
There were elections in 2007, and there were two governments previous to my own administration. We came in faced with an economic crisis. We've now taken the country out of that crisis very firmly, with very strong growth, and we're now returning power to the people will decide. The military has not intervened, and we hope that the people respect the decision of the Thai people on the 3rd of July.
I would just like to say, Mr. Prime Minister, that first of all, I think Mr. Thaksin has his problems, and I definitely, in terms of certain tendencies of his, but you know, I was in Thailand on May 19 last year, and I was really shocked at the massacre that took place. And I really don't think a civilized polity should be having its troops fire on its people. And I really admire Thailand. I like the Thai people, but I really was shocked by this departure from democratic norms.
No, can I respond to that, Professor? I think you were there only on the 19th. If you were there for the previous 2 months, you will know that none of the losses would have taken place if there had been no armed elements within the protesters. And we did our best. We exercised utmost restraint, tolerance, patience, which is well accepted worldwide, and also the fact that after the events, there was clear accountability. We had parliamentary debates, censure debates, where all the facts came out. And we still have independent commissions still working on the fact-finding mission. Nobody wants to see those losses, Professor. But we also need to make sure that the law is upheld. I don't think that people or any government should succumb to threats and intimidation just simply for a group of people to get their way. And as I said, we're now returning power to the people. We're now focusing on the people's priorities, which is about the issues that we are discussing today. And sorry to say that Kun Thaksin's followers are still concentrating on his own interests and not the interests of the Thai people. And that's what this election is going to be about.
We've already touched on corruption, and I want to open up the floor to questions from the audience and come first to Transparency International.
I would like to ask the panel's opinion. What are the essential measures that need to be taken to fight corruption? Because this is also related to the government's call to involve the private sector in creating more equitable growth, but the private sector will not go in an environment which is corrupt or with government policies which are inconsistent and so on. In other words, where governance is no good. So what needs to be done to better improve governance in respective countries in Asia?
Could I ask all of you perhaps just to choose one really essential measure for tackling corruption? Minister.
I think it has to be both on the apprehension and enforcement side. I think, let's reflect on Indonesia. In 1996, I kid you not, we could not even use the word corruption. We had a euphemism for it, high-cost economy. Now we can talk about corruption very freely in the sense that you can see all the cases that are going on now. We have an independent anti-corruption commission. We have a process which, it has its pluses and minuses still, but there's a process where even governments or powerful people actually cannot really intervene. So I think setting up that process and putting credibility into that process puts a lot of apprehension into the corrupt practices. And I think the only other thing I would add is bureaucratic reform that has to go in parallel, including better remuneration for the public servants. and introducing more transparent online systems, not face-to-face, arm's length types of transactions between the public and the government. Those would be, in parallel, would be, to me, the two takeaways from the Indonesian experience.
Now, Congressman, do you think that higher wages in the government sector for civil servants would change a culture of corruption if that exists?
Yes, it would help, but I think the most important thing for me right now is prosecution. We have to have a good record of prosecution. For instance, in the Philippines, we've had 9 years of unmitigated corruption, and the test of the current government is whether it will be able to bring the former president to prosecute her and bring her to jail. I mean, that's what it's being judged on right now, and if it can't do that because of all sorts of blocks to it, then I think people are going to lose faith in it. Mr. Aquino came to power with an anti-corruption agenda, but good intentions are not enough. You've got to be able to prosecute, and I think this is a problem throughout Asia, that prosecution, when it comes to prosecution, too many people get off the hook. So the justice system has to really be improved.
And being able to talk about it, perhaps, as you can in Indonesia, as you can in many other countries, isn't actually enough to sort it out. Would that be right,
I would
Prime
agree
Minister?
that deregulation is important. Reducing monopolies in the system helps. And also the issue of enforcement. We're facing a challenge. We're in a situation where now a proposal for an amnesty for corruption charges against former Prime Minister is actually being run as a platform. So it's a real challenge to the attitude of our people as well, whether we accept and tolerate corruption. And one of the things that I think we've been encouraged by recently has been the initiatives taken by the private sector. They have to be involved also, because corruption doesn't just involve government officials, but also with business and also with the civil servants. So now that we are trying to come into a pact, integrity pact with the private sector, they will actually gather support among the business community that they won't pay bribes, they won't be involved in corruption. That will surely help. But there's also a long road in terms of changing people's attitudes, who perhaps have become too familiar, too tolerant of corruption. And we've been blessed in Thailand with His Majesty's wisdom of sufficiency economy, where there is so much emphasis on moderation. That also helps put people, when they see things in perspective, that greed and selfishness is very much at the roots of corruption.
Prashant Ruia, how do you see it from the Indian perspective? Is it too ambitious to talk about bringing it to an end?
No, but I think this is a very recent debate in India over the last few months. Clearly, the clearly more transparent government policy is clearly an answer. But also, at least in India, one of the major issues which is getting addressed to deal with this is how government gives out the wealth which is owned by the nation, whether it be mines, or whether it be spectrum in the case of telecom, or any natural wealth owned by the country. And that's one major area where if we have a transparent auctioning policy, that would to a large extent deal with putting these allegations to rest.
And you had your own experience of that, didn't you, in being questioned over telecoms licenses? Is it something that goes with the territory for big business in India?
No, I think again, the very fact that this is happening over something which was given 4 or 5 years ago is testimony to the open society which we have right now, and it's something which we are dealing with.
I'd like to focus the next part of the discussion on looking at what the signals are in terms of people's attitudes to inequality, changing perceptions. And I'm interested to hear from all of you about whether you feel people are more aware today of the inequalities, more demanding perhaps. Walden, you've worked as an activist for many years before entering Parliament. Is it easier to make people more aware of their rights today than it was when you first began?
Yes, I think throughout the population, from the upper class to the lower classes, there's a great deal of consciousness about inequality. there's more demands for it to be, it's no longer that tolerated. And so I think there's also a very high degree of consciousness about corruption at this point in time. And so I would say that you have a situation whereby there's a great deal that's being expected from governments at this point in time, and they have to deliver in terms of reducing inequality and eliminating corruption. Those are just two things that are there at this point in time. At the same time, the one thing that I think there has to be more of is a sense that economic policies do matter. The thrust of an economic program does matter. For instance, can we start moving beyond export-oriented growth? Our economies throughout Asia have been so focused, including China, has been so focused on the export markets in the West. And as we've known from the financial crisis, and Europe being stagnant and the United States being in the midst of crisis at this point, that those markets are going to be stagnant for a long time. So I think the focus now should really be how do we refocus growth on the internal economy. And I think a number of the speakers here, including the Prime Minister, have focused on the fact that you really now have to have high wages, you have to have a more equal economy, because the markets will now have to be here instead of in Europe and in the United States.
Isn't this where there's a sort of circle going on here? Because if you need to depend less on your exports and you need to sell more to your own people, you need to reduce the inequality so that they have the means to be the strong consumers you need, Prime Minister.
There's a wider picture here as far as Asia is concerned, which I mentioned earlier, and I think Professor has now picked up upon. We're really surplus economies at the moment, and we're at the crossroads. What do we do with that surplus? What do we do with that wealth? There are two paths that I don't want to go along. One is we're using that surplus basically to finance the consumption of the Western, the American, or the European countries. There has to be a bit of that for rebalancing in the global economy, but it would also be a waste of the surpluses that are being generated. Secondly, we should be careful that that surplus is not used simply to encourage consumption within the economies. If you do that, then it's likely to go to the well-to-do, the richer parts of the economy. What we'd like to see is that surplus is now used for two things. First, it should be used to invest in infrastructure. That will be something that will help the future generations and to connect up, to bring people in remote areas, rural areas, people with less opportunities into the economy.
Which China has done quite successfully.
Which they are doing. And the second thing that we should do also, of course, is to build up a better welfare system. We need to build better safety net programs, which is what we are doing in Thailand also. We make sure that to cope with the volatility of the market economy, we need to make sure that all our people at least have some kind of insurance. We are now beginning programs on crop insurance against extreme weathers. We want to carry on with the income guarantee programs because we want to make sure that if they're sick, if they're old, if they are in the agricultural sector, they need to have some kind of assurance that their lives can go on.
And that's an interesting shift. And I wonder, Prashant Ruia, whether you think people expect that kind of safety net now, because that's quite a big shift from the idea that you look after yourself or your family looks after you to thinking that actually the state owes you something.
Yes, I think, but just to come on to the earlier point first, I think India is a fairly good example for growth which is based off internal consumption and internal demand. 70% of India's GDP is driven domestically, and the entire focus of the government and the country has been on growth led on internal consumption. And I think and India has never been an economy focused on exports. As regards the safety net, I think at least currently in India the safety net is provided by family, because for generations it's been the family which is the safety net for the people who require it. If from a government perspective, it's certainly welcome, but I think it's going to take some time if in India something has to be provided on such a large basis.
And I wonder, Congressman, what you think the right safety net is. Whose job is it? Should it still be the family's job to provide for individuals?
No, definitely.
I mean, you've done a lot of work on the World Bank and the IMF.
Yes, no, definitely. I think the state has to step in and, in fact, provide these safety nets. And we've had, years whereby our economies were really pushed along structural adjustment lines, get the state out of, production, get the state out of welfare. That's ended. And we really are now all throughout Asia. There's this refocusing on the duty of government is to assist the people and provide and help them from slipping through the nets. And this is definitely something that we're trying very hard to do in the Philippines. And when the Prime Minister was speaking, I was very glad at a number of the proposals he was making. But I also wanted to make the point that, as I understand it, Mr. Thaksin's government was in fact pushing all of the safety nets, and that probably this is what is good about competition, in that it forces the Democrats to also consider safety nets.
No, well, I would just have to say, yes, I think one of the policies that the Thaksin government pushed, which was very good, was the universal health coverage, which is something that we have supported and therefore continued, and I would say even improved upon. But also so much wealth was taken away from the country by his government also. And he didn't actually encourage a kind of sustained model of building up a welfare system. Too much was on the populist handouts. And our approach, and I would add this as a qualification to when you say who should be building up the welfare system, it shouldn't be solely the state. And I think it shouldn't be solely the state. I think we should tap into the culture of high savings in the Asian economies, where people have to make their own contributions also, which is why we're now setting up a savings fund. We are now opening up opportunities for the informal sector to join the social security system, whereby we therefore encourage people to continue to save, but they get additional matching funds from the state. And this kind of welfare model, I think, would be more sustainable, because we don't want to go in and get into a situation later on like many other economies in the West have gotten themselves into, which is the inability to sustain that kind of welfare model where the state just relies solely on taxes.
Well, politics aside, if I can say something on social safety nets, I think social safety nets should be targeting the very poor and the very vulnerable, and it has to be done in a well-targeted way and using the right types of subsidy. Do you give cash? Do you give in-kind? One of our lessons in 2005 was we reallocated the fuel subsidy, which was said to be intended for the poor, but actually it was not benefiting the poor. And we reallocated it so that it would benefit the poor in terms of cash transfer as well as rice subsidy, for instance. And then the next layer, that's where you create more opportunities, microfinancing, job creation, self-employment. So I think you have to, for addressing inequality at different levels, you have to have very different policies and be very clear on the target. I think that's so that you know what needs to be done. And I would say democracy, the debate that was going on here, democracy is actually the best test for whether a social safety net is actually what the people want. You are not going to get elected next round if you don't really deliver to the people. And that's exactly what happened in Indonesia in the 2009 elections. People voted not based on ideology anymore. They voted on whether the politicians were delivering what was needed.
Prashant Ruia, how much is there a trend towards corporate social responsibility in India? This is not a region of the world that is known for CSR, but I wonder, is that changing?
Yes, I think there's been a big change again in the last few years, and most of the major corporates are taking a CSR very, very seriously. We have a foundation called the Essar Foundation, where we provide CSR around 3 themes. Entrepreneurship is one of them, education, and all around our facilities. Most of our facilities are actually in the less developed states, and there is a very, very major focus on providing education and entrepreneurship to most of these people.
I know you do very good work, but I'm just wondering whether there is ever a point where, when you live in a particular area, like I know you're particularly active in Gujarat,
Right,
which is where a lot of your production base is. Could it also not exacerbate inequality? Because you're probably operating in states where there are lots of opportunities already, and then when your CSR is focused on that same region, again, it leaves other parts of India behind.
And I think Gujarat, therefore, is not a very good example, because Gujarat is actually one of the states which is doing extremely well and is right up there amongst the performance amongst all the various states. And therefore, more of our activity is actually in the less developed states on the eastern part of the country, which is Jharkhand, Orissa, and those states which actually need much more CSR activity.
I'm going to come to a couple more questions from the audience. Ian Bremer.
I'll bring a question up on that democracy test. In Indonesia today, we've had an extraordinary move towards democracy. To what is the mentality there sufficiently for President Widodo to say, I'm not going to groom, I'm not going to talk about who my leader, my successor is going to be? Or is there a significant risk that the roots aren't sufficiently entrenched? In Thailand, with very significant upcoming elections coming, are the generals sufficiently respectful of the significant mentality supporting democracy, and will they respect whatever outcome comes from a democratic election?
Democracy is well and alive and getting stronger every day in Indonesia, because don't forget, it's not just direct presidential election. We have direct elections all the way down to the village head. So I think Indonesians in the last 5 years have gotten used to democracy and electing people or politicians based on performance. And there's been a huge, I think, information spread there. I think that's the other component, democracy plus instant information and instant response. The fact that we have this social media, interconnecting the youth of Indonesia as well as the people of Indonesia. 38 million people in Indonesia use Facebook, 162 million people have handphones, and so on. I think similar with the other countries. So you really, in a way, you really can't lie.
Prime Minister
If
Abhisit,
you follow the coverage of the elections, you will see that all political parties, the army and all groups are now saying that everybody, not just generals, everybody has to respect the decisions of the people on the 3rd of July.
it's not the same as believing. Do you believe that the generals, are you absolutely certain that they will respect every result? Talking about it is not the same as you believing.
There's no reason to believe that the decision would not be respected. And it is clear that all political parties have the freedom to campaign now, and they are also going to have the freedom to choose the next government once the election results are known.
Walden Bello, are you as confident about the entrenchment of democracy in this part of the world?
I hope the Prime Minister is right. I'm a bit more skeptical. I do believe that if it is the opposition that wins, I think Thailand will have problems with the generals and with the, shall I say the word here, we're in Indonesia, with the monarchy. There is, I think there's a problem in a polity where saying something about the king gets you or lands you in jail. I don't think that lèse-majesté rules have any place in a modern polity, which is why I'm a bit skeptical. Having said that, I have to say that when it comes to the country, the Philippines, we've had formal democracy, but we lack the economic component of democracy, which has made us, despite 26 years of elections, it has made us, things are very unequal in the country. So I think that the challenge for all of our countries is how do we move away from formal electoral democracy to real economic democracy. That's, I think, very, very central at this point in time.
If you think of what's happening in India in terms of democracy, I think it's a very good shining example of how the people's view and the people's verdict is final. It's been proven now over the last few decades, and I think that's something which might be the right a good example for us all to follow.
Except is it not the case that it hasn't actually lifted proportionally the same number of people out of poverty in India when you compare it to an authoritarian system in China?
Yeah,
if we're looking purely at inequality.
Yes, I think that might be true. But then you also give up a lot of your other. I mean, you get that with a lot of other things, and in democracy the growth is slower, the decision making may be a bit slower, but at the end the people feel that people have a voice and they get what they want, and they have the right to choose if a government is not performing.
I guess you can always find exceptions to the rule, but you would have to be convinced that economic and political democracies will help support each other. If you have more economic democracy, you are likely to support a more liberal democratic regime. And vice versa, if you have political democracy, the chances are that the government that needs to respond to the majority of people will have to make sure that there is greater economic democracy also. I know this isn't a forum to discuss Thai politics, but since the professor keeps bringing this subject up, I should also point out that he's quite right in saying that political democracy has many dimensions. And when he said that the opposition, if they win, might create problems, I think it depends on what they do. If they would get on with the issue of governing for the majority of people, there would be no problems. But if they try to subvert the rule of law, if they try to overturn court decisions, if they try to grant amnesty and put one man's interests over the people's interests, and when that man has been questioned about issues about corruption and human rights, you have to say that the democratic process is more than just elections and majority rule, which is why the problems that we saw in 2008 wasn't brought initially by the fact that the pro-Thaksin parties won. It only began when they begin to make proposals like amnesty and therefore created troubles. As for the lèse-majesté law, let me just say that this is part of the criminal code. Is tied to our historical and cultural roots, part of national security, and the monarchy has no self-protective mechanism. This is something that, if things were said about you, Professor, you could take them to court. The monarchy can't take people to court, which is why we have this law. And I would say that the people are being taken to court for things they say about the monarchy. They would also be taken to court if they were saying the same things about other
Prime
people,
Minister,
and they wouldn't get pardons either.
Prime Minister, thank you very much. In our last few moments, I would really like to put the focus on the future and perhaps to ask you to pick a model, it could be a country, it could be a policy for reducing inequality that is proven to make a difference and which you would like to see in place. Congressman.
Well, if you ask me, let me just say that since the question of China came up, as Mr. Prasad had brought up, I don't think China is a good model for Southeast Asia, even with the so-called very high growth rates that it was able to achieve. I think the creation of inequality and the lack of real democracy in China is a very big problem. And it's a very big problem not only for the Chinese people, but it becomes a big problem for us in Southeast Asia. We have a situation whereby our big northern neighbor is throwing its way around in a place like the Spratlys, claiming that the whole sea belongs to them. And I think I just wanted to bring this up because we cannot have a discussion about Southeast Asia in the future without bringing in the whole question of China. And I think that we all have a common interest in making sure that China behaves.
Minister.
From a personal as well as from a professional perspective, I would say remove the inequities for women, because you would get a lot of bang for that, in the sense, bang for the buck in that sense, because you would address a lot of other inequities. Give them equal opportunity for education, girls and boys, equal opportunity for education, equal opportunity for work, equal opportunity for capital, and equal wages. Because for $1 a woman gets for her spending, she will spend 90% on the household. Male will spend only 50% on the household. That means, they will spend on food so the children are well fed, more nutritious food, so human capital investment. Education, and women empirically are less corrupt. Also a lower bad debt ratio. So it's a good investment to reduce all kinds of inequities.
Obviously, I'm loving this, but I fear you may be accosted by many people as you actually leave this room today. Prashant Ruia.
No, I think we've got in the region, the democratic process which we have, and especially in India, is an extremely good model, given the diversity and the size of the country which we've got. Obviously, we have to remove the inequality. That's something which I think we have discussed and everybody is concerned about. But I think the overall model which we have is the right one, and the focus should be more on execution of our plans and the development of the country, and the region, which I'm sure is what all the political leaders are trying to do.
Prime Minister, is there a country that you look to as an example?
Let me just first of all reconfirm what the Trade Minister has said. We do have the same experience about women being much better debtors than men. And I would certainly support participation of women in the development process and taking care of more of the financial aspects of the economy. No, I don't have a particular model, but I think what we should do is we should learn from a variety of experiences. I think we often look and aspire to the kind of welfare that has been built up by the Scandinavian countries, for instance. But if we can't have high taxes, we should tap into the high culture, the high savings culture of Asia. We should look to China in terms of infrastructure, in terms of recycling the surplus. We should look to microfinancing experience in a number of South Asian countries, which is working well. We should look at innovative schemes like having poverty alleviation measures being tied to making sure children are kept in schools from some Latin American countries. I think we should learn from a variety, pick and choose the best, and make it our own model here in Southeast Asia.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank the panel who've taken part in this world debate: Prime Minister Apasit of Thailand, Indonesia's Trade Minister Mari Pangestu, Congressman Walden Bello from the Philippines, and the CEO of India's Essar Group, Prashant Ruia. We've been here as part of our Power of Asia season across the BBC on television, radio and online. Thank you to our audience here in Jakarta, and goodbye.